As Israel and the U.S. both are actively fighting against terror groups in the region. Here with us to discuss the situation is the former Deputy National Security Advisor and Senior Fellow at the INSS, Chuck Freilich. Chuck, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on. To start, after last night, where do you expect this conflict with the Houthis to go, given that the U.S. is actively engaging in this fight? Will we see continued missiles on Tel Aviv?
Well, I would imagine that this missile wasn't the last one. I don't know what the Houthis are going to do beyond that. They're in a tough position. On the one hand, it would be maybe foolhardy on their part to ignore Trump's warnings, and at the same time, they can't really be seen to be caving in completely. So maybe for them, the solution to the quandary, so to speak, will be occasional, hopefully isolated missile attacks on Israel.
And hopefully not at 4 a.m. Now, pivoting a little bit to...
They won't have it, but...
Exactly.
The
Exactly. Now, pivoting to Gaza, there is tremendous pressure now. The IDF began their ground operation again. Already we're seeing some successes, but what's the end game here?
Well, that's a very good question. What can we do now that we couldn't do in the course of almost a year and a half of essentially uninterrupted fighting? Is there some great new military maneuver that we have up our sleeves? I don't know many experts who believe that to be the case. At the same time, Hamas has been reconstituting, taking advantage of the ceasefire, and there is certainly that military justification for wanting to take them down, at least somewhat. At the same time, I think it is very hard and, in essence, impossible to divorce what's happening from the domestic political crisis in Israel and the prime minister's attempts to basically remain in office at all costs and do just about anything to that end.
Well, we've seen reports that Israel has considered at different points annexing territory in exchange for any hostage that is harmed. Now, I know this isn't something, that's gone into effect, but is this tactic to increase pressure on Hamas, is that something that can move the needle even on negotiations?
Well, I think in international relations in general, certainly when you're negotiating or trying to do so with a terrorist organization like Hamas, it's always good to back up diplomacy with a threat. And sometimes you have to carry out the threat or carry it out to some degree. There is a difference between conducting military operations, conducting coercive diplomacy, and going ahead and annexing territory. There's a reason that we got out of Gaza in 2005, the so-called disengagement agreement. We don't really want to be there in the long run. We've got nothing to look for in Gaza. We have nothing in common with the Gazans. Gaza is essentially, well, it's one of the poorest places on earth, and I don't necessarily mean that in the economic sense, that too. Gaza is a very sad place, and beyond ensuring our security, I don't think we want to be there.
All right, we are almost out of time, but I want to ask you, with the massive protests in Israel over the renewed judicial reform, the recent moves of the prime minister to remove the head of the Shin Bet, what will the impact be on the battlefront, if any?
Well, it's not just the removal of the head of Shin Bet, it's the firing of the attorney general. It's an unbridled attack on Israel's legal and democratic systems. We've seen this movie. We have the fortune of knowing what it can lead to. There is no doubt, and this isn't an opinion, we have captured Hamas documents which show how they assessed that the judicial overhaul in 2023 was greatly weakening Israel, and they were trying to take advantage of those circumstances. And God forbid, well, maybe they can't that much at the moment, but there are still other enemies around. Hezbollah is much weaker than it was, but still a sizable force. And Iran is there, and there are other people in the region who don't like us. So it's time to stop this. It's a true threat to Israel's national security.
All right, well, we are out of time, but I want to thank you, as always, for your insights. Thanks for joining us, Chuck.
Thank you.